So as I mentioned, we're going to be using MySQL for this series, simply because it's probably the most popular database management system used on the internet. But other database management systems do exist. So to install MySQL, we just need to go to mysql.com and click Downloads. We then need to scroll down to the bottom to Community GPL Downloads. And from here you'll get all of the open source versions of MySQL. The specific version we're going to install is MySQL on Windows, simply because I'm using Windows at the moment. And I'm also going to select the MySQL installer. And this will give us two options. We can either use this first option if we're going to be installing it while we're connected to the internet, or if you're not connected to the internet while you're installing it, you can use this second version. So I'm going to go ahead and download this first version. So on this page, you don't actually need to sign up or create an account. You can just click no thanks, just start my download, which will download the installer. When we run this, we'll get just a normal installation wizard, which I'm sure you'll have seen many of in the past. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about how to do this. It's just a matter of clicking on the options and selecting what you want. I'm going to speed the video up now just because there's not much interesting happening on screen. While all of this is happening as well, it's worth mentioning that while I'm using MySQL for this series, there are plenty of other databases out there, and the basics of the SQL, the SQL behind them, will be common amongst most of them. So if you're writing a web app in either PHP or Ruby or whatever else, the SQL codes that you will write within the PHP or Ruby will be identical to what we're using here. But if you're using a different backend, a different database, the actual SQL that you use may be slightly different. So I'm just going to bring you back in at this point, just to outline the fact that you do have to set a root password as you're going through the installation process. This can be anything that you want it to be, but just for the sake of this series, I'm going to use the root password, my password. And as mentioned, I'm going to change this from running as a service so that it runs in as a natural process. This just makes managing the process easier from Task Manager. It doesn't actually impact the program at all. So now we're done with the installation, and we're just going to configure a few final things. It's mostly just a matter of clicking next through all of this. And that's just validating the fact that everything's set up. And we're going to leave this ticked to start MySQL Workbench once setup is complete. So this is MySQL Workbench. This is just the program that we're going to be using to actually manage our database. So if we click here, we can add a new connection. And so now we've got access to our database. If you double click this icon, and this is just the actual editor that we're going to be using to manage our database. So as you can see, we've got basic options on the left, a main area where we're going to do all of our typing, an area on the right which is just going to be contextual help, and then a console log at the bottom. You can see here we've got some tables already installed. These come with the program just so that you can get used to using it. So if we wanted to select everything from this table, we first need to actually select this by double clicking on the database, and the database name will go bold. Then we're able to run this query, which will return all of the data in the actual main window for us. There are also shortcuts as well, so if you see carefully, there's this table icon here, and this will display all of the information from that table. It will run this query for us. An area that I don't tend to use too much is this context help on the right, and so you can disable this by clicking up here. Now we're not actually going to be using these sample tables in our lessons, we're going to be using one I've already prepared. So if you navigate across to github.com, this is the Stretch Project page, so if you just type github.com/stretchprojects and then click on repositories and then learn SQL. When you access this, there will be more files here, but if you click download zip, this will download all of the files for you. If you then open that, you'll find this file. So if you open this is actually just the raw commands to actually create a table for us. So if you copy and paste this across to MySQL Workbench and just paste it into here, in which case you just need to click execute all, and that will run through and actually create all of the tables for us. Or if you wanted to, you could run this as a file, in which case you just need to select the actual file and click open. And that will open the file for you, and if you run it from there, it will do the exact same thing. Now, one small downside to MySQL Workbench is that it doesn't actually add the new databases to our list for us. We need to type the name of the new database, which is restaurant, into here and then click refresh. And that will search for and find our new database. And then we just need to double click the name of the database, the restaurant, so that we set that as our current working database. And as you can see now, we've got all of our new tables available to us. And just by clicking on these table icons on the right here, we're able to see all of the data within each table. Now when you download this file from GitHub, you will notice that there is more than just lesson 2 in it. There will be files for each individual lesson. And the reason for that is if you wanted to skip ahead to a specific lesson, you could just run that specific file and the database will be saved in the correct state for that actual lesson. So it's not a matter of having to follow each of the individual lessons through to make sure that the database is in the same state at each lesson. So if you wanted to skip ahead to the update lesson, which was lesson 6, you would be able to find lesson6.sql here and run that file. And then you won't need to worry about missing the insert lesson, which was lesson 5. All of the data within the database will be in the correct state for the start of that lesson.